Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Emily Baranowski. I am Phi Alpha Delta's Deputy Director. We are so pleased to have you join us for the next installment of Phi Alpha Delta Founders Week, our inaugural Founders Week in honor of the 118th Founders Day of Phi Alpha Delta, which was this past Sunday. We're really excited to be bringing you this week of programming and hopefully really valuable content for all of you. And if this goes well, hopefully we'll keep it going in the spring and again next year. We're really, really pleased to be joined tonight by Lawonda Warren. We are here to have a conversation with her and to hear about her experiences and her professional career. Lawonda is the Assistant City Attorney and the Police Legal Advisor for the City of Delray Beach, Florida. Prior to her current position, she was a prosecutor with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office and the Florida Statewide Prosecutor's Office, She received her JD from Nova Southeastern University and her bachelor's degree from Florida Atlantic University. She's an active member of the Palm Beach County Bar Association, where she serves on the Judicial Campaign Commission, the Committee for Diversity and Inclusion, and she served as the co-chair for the 2018 Bar Bench Conference. So without further ado, we will begin our conversation this evening. Lawonda, I want to thank you again so much for being here. We're really excited to have you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you all for having me.
So to start, first of all, I'll give everyone a quick heads up on the format for this evening. We'll be continuing our discussion as we go, but we'll take a little bit of a break in the middle to kind of open things up to questions so that you're not just listening to me blab the whole time. So if you guys do have questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat feature. I'll be moderating that as we go along. So without further ado, let's get started. Lawonda, I was hoping you would start by just telling us a little bit more about your background, your general info, what a typical day looks like for you in your position.
Okay, I'll start with my transition to my legal career. So in undergrad, I was actually a music business major. I wanted to be a corporate executive, like a P.A.D or something, and own my own label. I interned at a record label in Miami that was a subsidiary of Atlantic Records in their business and legal affairs department. So there I handled different types of trademark agreements and different types of artist agreements and things like that. I had the opportunity to actually review it. So I decided for my senior project to do a recording contract. So I shadowed an entertainment lawyer and interned with him for a semester in undergrad. And I decided, okay, well, I want to go to law school and kind of combine my passions. Mm-hmm. So I went to law school, and when I was in law school, we had a choice of tracks. You can do transactional or you can do litigation. I decided to do general because I wasn't necessarily sure what I would do. But it was then when I did mock trials where, I love trials. And I was like, oh, this is much more fun than sitting around and reviewing agreements. So they said, well, where do you go if you want to get trial experience? And one of my mentors was a former judge and a former prosecutor. And she explained to me the difference between the two. And I was like, I think I would get more general experience if I went to the prosecutor's office. And I tried a lot of cases. Between my time as a state prosecutor at the Statewide, which is where I tried complex litigation cases across jurisdiction. It's more like a U.S. attorney job, but just specifically for Florida. And then in my local county, I tried at least 100 jury trials, so I got a ton of experience. But, I started to get a little burnt out, and I wanted to transition more into civil work. And I came across my current position, which is an assistant city attorney and police legal advisor. So what's a day in my life like? I tell people half of my work is transactional and half of it is litigation. So full circle back, I'm reviewing contracts for half of my days. So I spend a lot of time reviewing contracts. So I review all of the contracts for the police department specifically, and then I sit on various boards. I assist with community improvement. So that's my transactional side, as well as like public records requests and different type of general advisement. So I'm basically kind of like the right hand to the police chief. If he needs anything, I answer any questions. I assist with policy drafting, legislative updates, and things like that. And then the other half is I do litigation work where I represent the city if they're sued, from car accidents to federal, 1983 constitutional violation cases. So I do the litigation for the city as well on that side. So a typical day in my life, it varies. It just depends on what I have going on. Like, so for today, I woke up, I had Zoom court. After court, I reviewed some contracts. And then I did some discovery responses. And then I had a board meeting for one of our city boards this evening, just before now. So it varies, but I do like the variety of my job. It never gets boring.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think many people could say that they would prefer to have a little bit of variety rather than doing the same thing day in and day out. That's definitely something I would agree with as well. How has it been working in government during the past, 6 months to a year, between all the changes with the COVID-19 crisis to the social justice causes that we've seen that have had a particular light shined on them in the last few months? What, in terms of, your day-to-day job, of course, you've seen, like you mentioned, Zoom court, things have changed, but how has that changed overall? How do you feel like your relationship with the parties you work with have changed?
Yeah, I mean, I never see them. I telework right now. So most of my job, I work from home now. I've been working from home since about March. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, the technology, I think we've really expanded and grown in industry because, before we used to pick up the phone and call people. And now I'll be sitting at my computer and we have something called Teams, which is like Zooms, but it's like a Microsoft program. So people will just Teams me to call me. So they still kind of want to see you. So I'll get a Teams call in the middle of the day, whether it's like, hey, what's going on? I have Zoom depositions, which are kind of strange. I don't know. I know we may have some undergraduates, some law students, and probably some attorneys on the call, but there's something about having an in-person deposition where you can really dig into someone and really press them. And now it's like Zoom, so it's conversational. So it's a little different. I think that it's a game changer, but it is shown that we could definitely do a lot of the things, that we were doing before. One of my favorite things is our 8:45 court hearings now that I used to go to in the morning, wait in the long line to get into the courthouse and sit in a courtroom and wait for my case to get called. And, from door to door is like an hour and a half. And now it's like, oh, I pop on for my 8:45 hearing and then I leave, right? So I think for me as a government attorney, it has not necessarily affected me much because I still do a lot of my meetings and things like that online. But a lot of my colleagues who have their own firms or they have billable hours and things like that, it's become more difficult because they need they need the courtroom time and things like that to make sure their billing hours are up. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it's definitely been a transition, but I think it's something that we've, managed to handle well in the profession so far.
Good. Yeah, I know I was speaking to someone last week who expressed similar thoughts about the idea of court. Now, it used to be this whole process. You get up early, you go through the security, all that stuff, and now it's like you log on and you're just good to go. And they were definitely talking about too how that is so beneficial for some of their clients who maybe had problems getting into court or challenges in that regard, and now they just need to log on. It's not this waiting game of, oh, we'll just sit here for a few hours until our case docket comes up. So I think that's yeah. Is that something like you hope kind of maybe sticks around, that maybe efficiency?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
at least the 8:45 hearings. I definitely miss the in-person depositions, and I can't even imagine during a jury trial. I watched our Supreme Court did a pilot for a trial, and it was rough. From picking a jury, like I can't even, there's something about being in the room with people and really getting a feel for their, their demeanor and if they're paying attention. And, Zoom, it's kind of hard to see all the screens and the panels, but when you're in the room in front of a jury, you can see if someone's dozing off, you can see who's taking notes, you can see who likes you and who doesn't like you. So
right. It's harder to read
different.
People when we're all these little Brady Bunch squares. I get that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you do a lot of work, I mean, in addition to your day-to-day work. And one of the things that really kind of jumped out to us here at Phi Alpha Delta is the fact that you work with high school mock trial teams. We've got a pretty big mock trial program with Phi Alpha Delta. We've got a competition for our pre-law students and our law school students. We really like mock trial. We could go on it for a while about that. With your experience with that, especially with the high school mock trial teams, do you feel it's really important to be getting, the youth, the teenagers, even, middle schoolers, elementary schoolers involved in the legal field early?
Absolutely. I tell people all the time that, we have to start from the bottom, right? Like I'm involved in so many different organizations and things where I'm getting out there and I'm trying to promote diversity in a lot of different areas, right? Like, for instance, one of the things, we do is, okay, well, we want to get diversity in jobs, right? Regardless of its age, sex, disability, sexual orientation, whatever it is. But if we don't have those people to pull from out of the pool, then how do we really truly diversify? So I think that from a young age, it's important to start from the bottom and start grooming people, right? And letting them know the things that are kind of important and talking to them about, things that you may have done differently or ways to get ahead, or even the importance of keeping good relationships with people, right? So for networking, you never know who you may come across again in life, right? And you start early. And I think that that's when you start from the bottom, that's when you kind of expand your pool, right? Because then you have those people who go from middle school to high school, and they may have a legal magnet program at their school. Then they go from high school to college, and they join groups like Phi Alpha Delta and, even student government or whatever they get involved in, that might be a trajectory for them to go to law school, right? And then that's when you get those people in the legal field, then I think that's when we can really truly start grooming and emerging them.
Good. Yeah, it's great to see so many more young people these days too taking an interest in the law. And what we've noticed from our perspective, because we do work with so many aspiring lawyers or undergrads, things like that, is that so many of them are finding these personal connections to the law that's really drawing them in. Like the reason they want to go to law school is because something in the legal field affected them personally, or affected one of their friends or one of their family members. And that is more so than ever what we're seeing is the driving force for these students to pursue a career in law. Are you seeing that as well with these high school students that you work with?
Oh, yes, I see that as well. I also mentor some students at a local high school in my city. Mm-hmm. It's a students whose English is their second language, from different backgrounds. And, one of the things I tell young people now, like everybody has whatever their different civil rights movement of their time, right? Whether you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when I was growing up, it was focusing on education and making sure that, as an equalizer. And like now I see a lot of these teenagers, they're thinking about things that I never even thought about, especially social justice things, right? And I think that's drawing them to the law because they're seeing, whether they want to become a public defender or become a policymaker or something like that, or a legislator. And those are different tracks that, can push people into the law. So I'm starting to see that a lot, actually, getting engaged in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to point out, as we're going to, everybody, please feel free to be sending questions in the chat. And if you're not comfortable having your question public, feel free to send it to me directly. That's perfectly fine too. But just so you know, it's an open conversation. Anyone can jump in with questions. I think it's interesting too, as we're talking about like cultivating these future leaders and these legal professionals from, K through 12 to, undergrads to current law students, et cetera, especially from diverse backgrounds, all of those things you mentioned. For you, what are your most, cohesive or most successful tactics for getting that diverse engagement? Is it kind of something you feel like you have to go out and search for it? Does it come to you? Is it a nature of the area you live in? What are you seeing there?
I live in South Florida. It's pretty diverse down here, and I'm also involved in different types of networking organizations, whether it's the Women's Foundation I'm very active with here in my county, a lot of the local bar associations. I'm in a sorority myself, so I do a lot of my service work through my sorority, which I've done since I was in college, right? So to me, it's like been innate in me since for years, right? Yeah. To want to give back. And, I learned from a young age that visibility is really important, right? And being out there, and I like to really consider myself a connector. So I always like to connect people and, lend a hand out and help because, I believe that there is an abundance of things or abundance of jobs or, I like to connect people. So I think one of the most actual successful things that I have done is since I've been on my CDI, and we'll talk about that later, with my Committee for Diversity and Inclusion, I've been in there for years, and we've always done this program based on the low number of minorities on the bench in our county. So let's say if our county is about maybe 18% African American, maybe 20% Hispanic, we have about 1% of our bench is Hispanic, and about maybe, I want to say 3 or 4% is African American, right? So obviously, when people come before judges, like I said, visibility is important, because people feel like, they may get a fair shot, or they understand their background or their circumstances or their heritage or culture, right? Mm-hmm. Because people are just different, right? And I may not understand like what your household was like. You may not understand what my Jamaican household was like, growing up. So that's important. So one of the most successful things we've done is to talk about cultivating and training. We decided to start a Road to the Bench Academy where, we're taking on diverse individuals from different backgrounds and connecting them to different types of classes, whether it's if they're on an election track or an appointment track by the governor, if they really want to become a judge, to try to increase that number. So I think training is important, and sometimes you do have to put yourself out there, right? And you do have to be in the room. So, to be able to make those decisions and to be influential. So I always try to stay involved.
Good. Yeah, I think it's really important to have that level of involvement in all these different organizations. I mean, you mentioned so many that you're a part of, and just that factor of having all of those things available to you to give back, for them to give back to you in growth, it really kind of opens up the opportunities. So that's really wonderful to see. It's important to have all of those different options rather than just be focused on one thing, I think.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a question messaged to me because you were talking about networking a little bit earlier, and being in the room, things like that. Someone asked if you could give your number one tip for networking or for connecting with other people. Like, it sounds like they're a person who's, maybe struggles with that and would like to know if you could give one piece of advice, what would it be?
So I would say be authentic in who you are. I think people can sense off the bat if you are being fake or if you are trying to build a relationship with them, just to go ahead. So I would say when I say be my authentic self, whenever I network with people, I try to find a commonality between me and another person. Right. So, I mean, we're all different, but we have some similar things, right? So whether it's what college you went to or what your hometown is, or, you just kind of meet people and you start from there. So.
Good. Okay. We got a couple other questions about some of your current work. So we'll take some time to go through those before moving on to the rest of our conversation. Keith wanted to know how you became a police legal advisor, and are you a member of the International Association Chief of Police Legal Officer Section? And are you the only police advisor in Delray, or are you part of a larger legal team for the city? That was a few questions at once, so I can break that.
So I'll start from the tail end, and then I'll make my way back. Yes, I'm a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police Legal Officer Section. So I am a member. It's a great section. We have conferences yearly. We actually didn't have ours last year, but there's usually about 40 or 50 of us that get together throughout the country. And I really feel at home there, as well as with my Florida Association for Police Attorneys group. I mean, we have a listserv, and like, you wouldn't believe the random questions that we would get and have for each other. And I think that is probably the best training and best conference that I go to yearly. So yes, I'm a member of that. The next question was, how did I become a police legal advisor?
Yeah.
But there was another shorter question that I can probably answer. The third question was,
yeah, are you the only police advisor in Delray, or are you part of a larger legal team for the city?
I'm a part of a larger legal team, but I am the only police legal advisor. I'm actually probably one of the few within our county. My county is pretty big. Palm Beach County, it's in South Florida. We're probably outside of like Miami-Dade, Broward County, Orlando. You know, our population is huge. And I would say across the state, there's probably less than 10 people that actually do that, specifically assigned internal, right, outside of sheriff's offices and things like that. So it is a small number. So you wonder, like, how did I get into such a niche area? So let's circle back to networking and community involvement, right? So with my sorority and with my bar association, there was a young man that was killed in our county. And our community was kind of at an uprest, a young man of color. And this had nothing to do with anything. I like to stay involved in things, but we decided to have a community forum, right? Which would really bridge the gap between law enforcement, because I'm pro law enforcement, but I also understand, you know, clearly the needs of our communities, right? So for me, I think that collaboration works better than any type of disconnect among the community, right? So I decided to host a Know Your Rights forum and community engagement forum. And I solicited some of my friends from the state attorney's office, my friends that were criminal defense attorneys. And then one of my girlfriends knew the police chief. And she's like, hey, you know, maybe the chief will come out because they want to make sure the relations are good. So I said, sure. I called him, literally cold called him and explained to him what we were trying to do. And he was super excited. Fast forward like a year and a half later, and there was an opening in my city, and one of my friends told me about it. And, you know, it's so interesting. They were interviewing people, and he just popped up in my interview. And he was like, oh my God, he was very impressed with my work ethic, my professionalism, how I handle things. And I wasn't even interviewing, right? So that's when you talk about building those relationships, because you never know who you're going to come across, and you always have to make sure you put your best foot forward. So I think maybe 190 people applied for my position, and I think that may have given me the edge just because he put a face to a name and not just a GPA or your history or your work experience, right?
Yeah, you're more than just the information on the resume kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. So that's why networking is important.
Wow, that's fascinating. And yeah, you were right. That was a longer answer of like, how did we get to this point? But thank you. That's great. We did receive a private question, one directed directly at me, and this person wanted to know, what is the most common problem or issue that you see when you're working among police officers? If that's something you're comfortable answering.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a problem, but we all have to understand that we are products of our environment and products of our experiences, right? Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes people in general have tunnel vision about what they're doing, regardless of whatever their position is. I mean, I know a lot of you guys probably have friends, whatever the side of the fence they're on in politics or, you know, sports teams or whatever, right? They only know what their general experience is. So I wouldn't say that that's a problem, but it's also like a sensitivity training toward people. So I think that getting anybody to step in the shoes of another person, I would say is difficult, you know. For the most part, everybody that I work for is awesome. I am proud of my agency. My police chief is extremely progressive. You know, we have a lot of great community policing efforts, but I think just sometimes in general, people, I think the hardest problem is getting them to see another's perspective. So that's why it's important to have different people and talking about diversity in a room, because then you can say, well, look, I'm a woman, and that sounds like an inappropriate comment to me, right? Or maybe you shouldn't talk to her like that, like on a camera or something. So, you know, I find that I'm kind of the conscience of the department sometimes, where it's like, okay, you know, the sounding board. But I would say that's probably the most difficult part about working with law enforcement. So.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I'm sure everybody sees it in every field they're in, whether it's a big law
Right.
firm where everyone's kind of insulated, or their own firm, or maybe they're not even practicing, but they see it in the industries that they're in. So yeah, that definitely a big one. We got one more question, and it kind of pivots away from your professional career back to some of the networking items we were talking about. Because as you know, we've got students on here, and some of them are dealing with some very unique challenges when it comes to school right now.
Right.
And so this student wants to know, for current 1L students who have classes solely through Zoom, would you have any steps or suggestions we should take towards networking, since it seems to be harder starting a law school career in such circumstances?
Oh, yes. When I was in law school, we used to be able to go to a lot of the local bar events and, talk to people in a kind of comfortable setting, whether it was like a happy hour or something where people are kind of like, easing out of their day, right? It's kind of hard. So you have to start being creative about the things that you do. So you try to go to the local bar function and bar events, but, there's nothing wrong with saying to someone, hey, you know what? But you have to have an authentic connection, right? So if you attend, let's say, a Zoom bar CLE event, right, that's talking about whatever topic that you might be interested in, there's nothing wrong with emailing someone like, you know what, I really like what you said specifically about XYZ. So they know that you were paying attention, and it may catch their eye, saying, if you have time, I'd like to chat with you more about that, and then you can have like a Zoom coffee date, or, whatever people's comfort levels are. Even when I spoke at the Phi Alpha Delta chapter at FAU, they were like, oh, do you guys have internships? And I was like, yeah, let me put you in contact with our human resources department, and whatever, you can network that way. So I think you just have to start being creative and don't be shy, because one thing I always tell people, no one's ever going to hear you unless you say something, and you have to be your biggest promoter. I'm not saying being obnoxious. I'm just saying you have to kind of put yourself out there. And I learned that early on in my career. So
you have to be your own number one fan and promoter in that. Yeah. Which I understand is usually difficult for people, especially if they're not even in that face-to-face session. I mean, you were talking about earlier about, jury trials. You can't read the jury.
No.
Positions, you can't really read what people are doing. So it's definitely more of a challenge, but it sounds like, just putting the work in is really that. At the end of the day, it'll pay off if you really make the commitment.
And it doesn't have to be something bold, right? It could be something small. Like I tell people with career advice, I started off in a prosecutor class of about 14 people. Okay. It was me, another young lady, and then it was like 12 white males. That was my whole class. I worked really hard. I've always been like an overachiever, very hard worker. And I wondered, like, wow, these people are getting promoted. I never got promoted, right? Because then you go from like misdemeanor courts to felony courts. So it's like small crimes to serious crimes. And so the second guy got promoted, and we were friends. And I was like wondering, like, what's going on here? And then after our trials, or after any big motions we had, he'd be like, just give me a second. I'm going to email the boss. I was like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just going to email our supervisor to tell her that I won my motion. And I was like, dude, you write the boss every time you do something? To me, I felt like that was like a brown noser, right?
Yeah.
But then I realized, I thought about it, and I was like, well, you know what? If there's 14 of us, how do they know what each of us are doing? They can't be in every courtroom. It's not like we have meetings every day where we talk about and decompress about the things that we've done. So you know what? Every now and then I just started sending like I wasn't going to email everything, but just like big trials. Like, oh my gosh, this is a dog of a case. I really thought I was going to lose, but I pulled through, and the judge said I did great. And then I was the next person to get promoted. And I think that's solely because I promoted myself, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, we can't be shy sometimes about, getting yourself out there or putting yourself out there.
Yeah, that definitely, you kind of have to shed that feeling of, oh, I don't want to take the spotlight away. No, make your own spotlight. Make sure people see you.
Right, exactly. Don't be too humble.
Good. Moving on with some of our other, there's a few things we wanted to make sure we talked about, so I want to make sure we get through them, and then we'll continue with some of the other questions at the end. You have talked so much about some of the service items that you do. You specifically said, like, you got into the habit of doing service with your sorority and it's stuck with you and that's just something that you feel really passionate about, what can everyday attorneys be doing to serve not only the legal community that they're involved in, but also their community as a whole? What would you want to see every attorney doing if you were able to tell them exactly what to do?
I mean, I think they can do small things and large things, right? Small things like get involved or donate to a local legal aid society, right? If your practice, area might be corporate finance or litigation or something like that, just something that you really wouldn't consider a community service type law job, right? Like a service oriented or a government type job. There are other things that you can do just like that, do some pro bono work. That's small, right? Every now and then take a pro bono client. Other smaller things or larger things that you could do is get involved with just like your local sports teams for your kids or for different organizations, right? You wouldn't believe the effect that you have just by building those personal type relationships with people. And if anything, it's just, like you, Emily, as a woman, a little girl might look at you and say, wow, I could do that, and you would have never thought, like, I read to some kids one day and a girl literally said to me, oh my God, I cannot believe that you're a lawyer. I was like, okay. It's just like, I've just never seen another, like a Black woman as an attorney, just because they just never have that experience. And like me, I'm first generation attorney in my family, but I've just gotten so used to it with my girlfriends and, my colleagues. And so to me, it's not a big thing, right? But just for any, a child to see you, that makes a difference. So even that representation matters. So it's just getting involved in different things. If you're religious, it's your local religious center. I know my church, we have a legal group, right? So that you can go to, and they do like Bible study and we do Christian things together. So it just depends. There's just so many things that you want to do, that you can possibly do to just donate your time. And if you ever take the oath of attorney for attorneys, one of those things is like, being a leader, and not just cashing your paycheck, right? Because I'll tell people all the time, I love my job, but I don't gain fulfillment, like true fulfillment from that, right? For me, it's giving back to others and helping.
Yeah, there's so much more than what you just do on a 9-to-5, or, let's be realistic. For lawyers, it's usually more than just a 9-to-5, but
right.
In that traditional setting, it's more than what you're doing, what you're waking up and going to your Zoom computer and logging on for your 8:45
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, mock trial is really important to us, but service is as well. That's one of our tenets. That's part of our entire, mission, I suppose you could say. And I'm not sure if the FAU chapter talked to you about this too, but one of the things that we stand for is service to the school, the profession, and the community. So for us to hear about just even how you can just essentially do service on a daily level, kind of almost committing to involving yourself in service that maybe isn't just a massive like, oh, I have to go do this service project this weekend. But like you said, showing up with your local community and being present and showing the people around you, the youth around you, how they can be involved. It's great to hear, especially these days when people sometimes feel like they're strapped for time, they're strapped for money, and they're like, service just means give me stuff. And it's like, no, you can find a middle ground there. Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to do it every day. I'm not saying you have to do it every month. Just try to, and I think we even have like pro bono requirements for private lawyers in Florida as well. So.
Okay. Yeah. I think there's a fair amount of states and everything that have that. So, and we're even seeing that on the law school level now. There's, pro bono requirements, but that's why we incorporate that into a lot of our chapter programming. So that's great to see. You mentioned that you were a first-generation lawyer, and we did get a question about that before we move on to our next topic. How do you feel like that has either impacted the way that you have kind of gone about your career? How do you feel like, did that give you an advantage maybe in some ways, or maybe a disadvantage in other ways?
The only thing that I would say that would kind of be of a disadvantage for me, I had like one of my close friends, her father was a lawyer. Her grandfather was a lawyer, and his father before that was a business person. So she grew up with this whole sense of grooming from the household, right? Mm-hmm. networking, going places, and all right, so if you need a job, you can have that connection. So I would say the biggest disadvantage for me is like kind of pulling from my family network has, I haven't been able to have those connections in that way. But, as an advantage, I work hard for everything that I've done. And, I almost feel like I've had to work harder. So, I always try to be as prepared and as possible. So, and maybe that's why I give back and more and make sure that I'm a representation as well.
Yeah, because you see people who might be in your position and you want to help.
Exactly.
That's great. Moving on to our next topic, and then I know I've had a fair amount of questions in the chat that we'll go through afterwards. But I was hoping you could take some time and explain your work with the Committee for Diversity and Inclusion at the Palm Beach County Bar Association.
Sure. So I've been involved with that for a while. Right now, I'm currently one of the co-chairs. So we do a lot of programming to make sure we encourage diversity and inclusion within our firms, our judiciary, our legal community, just overall in general. We want diversity across the board, like I was talking about earlier: age, sex, disability, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, etc. So we try to encourage that. We have different committees that are subcommittees within that. We do our summer interns where we recruit diverse interns and put them in firms and governmental agencies for summer jobs, right? So as summer associates, some people can't afford, to not work or and just strictly volunteer, right, at a law firm. So we raise money from firms to try to sponsor them as scholarships so they get paid while they have their summer internships. The other thing we do is we have article section in our bar journal where we just strictly focus on diversity issues. Like we just did something on RBG and just mental health issues, and qualified immunity was another good article that we wrote because a lot of people don't really know what qualified immunity is. There's a lot of questions about it. And then I talked about the Road to the Bench program. And then what we started recently too, which is important to me, especially as a woman and a woman of color, is a lot of times we get these things where you go to the deposition, right? And they confuse me as a court reporter, right? Like I've literally gone to the courthouse in a full suit and like, where are you going, ma'am? I'm going to court, And I don't know if it's because, I look younger than I am, or if it's because of my sex or my race, but sometimes people just don't have a perception of what a lawyer should look like. And I think generally overall in our community, people think lawyers look like an old white man, right? Or that's who they kind of respect, you know what I mean? As far as, oh, well, I'm going to go to that guy. That guy is going to be a better attorney for me. So I started a This Is What We Look Like campaign. And it really just across the board, we have an older gentleman, we have people of color, we have men, young, white females, just whatever, to say that, look, this is what lawyers look like. And it's not just one image of an attorney. With everything that's going around in our country, we also started a social justice and racial equality subcommittee where we do programming to encourage allyship and conversations about race in your day-to-day lives and about race in your workplace, because there's a lot of sensitive issues, because we found that, some of our, attorneys confidentially said, look, I just feel so uncomfortable at work. I don't know how to start that conversation, right? What can I do, to help out? So we started that and I think that's, to really make a diverse and inclusive workplace. Those conversations need to be had so people can actually feel comfortable, because at a certain point that starts to affect your mental health at work, right? Or your work product. So I'm really proud of those last two initiatives, because, it's something that we're really, really doing to try to affect change in our legal profession in our county.
That's fantastic. And just really giving people forum to get their voices out there and to be heard. It's incredibly important. So thank you for all the work you're doing with that. I hope to hear more about it. And maybe, if that's something that, other people can get involved in outside of your direct community, that'd be great to know as well.
Yeah, I think it's an important message.
Absolutely. So we've got a few more questions in the chat, and so if it's okay, I'm going to start just kind of going through them, and we'll go from there. But one of the things that you specifically brought up, just especially now too, as you were talking about your efforts, was mental health. How do you personally balance the mental health of being a lawyer, having all of these other commitments and service opportunities? How do you find balance between all of that? How do you stay sane, especially these days?
It's tough, but I always say that my peace is the most important thing that I have for me, and my mental health and sanity is the most important thing that I have. I'm a runner, so I run a lot. Like, I get up in the morning. That's my clarity, and kind of my mental health. I make the time to make sure that I'm reading, just things that are outside of my normal workload, and make sure that I spend time with family. So I'm a big scheduler and planner. So sometimes, I know it's not very spontaneous, but if you have to schedule the time for yourself, and especially when I talk to the young kids that I mentor, the mock trial teams, or just speak to, like, I feel like kids are so over-programmed, right? And even when you're in undergrad or law school, you're so busy trying to make that A and so busy trying to be involved in all these things that you forget to take care of yourself. So for me, you have to take that time and learn how to say no and say, you know what? Friday nights are my night. I don't do anything on Friday night. I don't do any work on Saturday, or whatever it is that you need time for yourself to recharge. Especially now with COVID, you have to, take that time for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I also use the planning method because I'm very much a planner myself, and I will literally pencil in on my calendar and write in, "You're busy, don't do anything," and then I'll get to it, be like, "Oh, right. I tricked myself into having time to do nothing." Right. But it works. The only thing I will say I don't necessarily relate as much is the getting up and running in the morning. More power to you, but I just, maybe it's also because I'm up here in the Mid-Atlantic, and we're going to get cold really soon. You guys have really great weather down there, so I imagine you can run year round. So.
Oh yeah, my favorite things are sunrise runs. That's like my thing. So
I imagine they are beautiful. I will hopefully one day motivate myself to be doing a sunrise run. Moving on to our next question. Do you have any advice specifically for the undergraduate students here in the Zoom room in regards to internships and networking opportunities as a whole? This person has found that as an undergraduate student, they've found it very challenging to find internship opportunities. I imagine, especially now with the COVID. So the current COVID pandemic. Do you have any advice for that?
Well, I would say as an undergrad, try to first start your career center. I know that's probably hard. They may not have a lot of things, but you can also just get jobs that are just like basic law clerk jobs that are more secretarial type work. And then you can kind of build your way up from that. And then also try to get involved with like Phi Alpha Delta, and sometimes they have like local bar association events and things like that you could just literally look up in your county bar association, right? Whatever your county's bar association is, and they have random events and things like that you can at least try to get involved in. Or if there's someone I like to say that I'm a connector, right? So if I know someone's looking for something, I'll go out of the way and call somebody and say, hey, do you need free work, right? And like, as long as it's not going to be a nuisance, people really don't turn it down, right? Even if it's just filing things for them. So
yeah, that's great advice. You spoke to this a little bit, but this person's question is, can you speak to your experience as a woman in the legal profession and how to distinguish yourself amongst a predominantly male field? At least that's how it's been in this person's experience. You talked a little bit about, shining a light on yourself and kind of promoting yourself, but can you expand on that a little bit?
I would like to say, be strong, and be graceful. And I think that's, to me, I find myself sometimes like biting my tongue with a smile, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's just not everything's worth the arguments, but be strong in your positions and your convictions, right? Mm-hmm. And just be confident in who you are, right? Like in the courtroom, I used to come to court and, the older male attorneys would be like, sweetie, or honey, or, and sometimes you just have to say, I'm not your honey. And then you smile and usually it softens things. And you shouldn't have to do that. But unfortunately, we're just perceived differently, So I would say be strong in your convictions, but, be graceful at the same time. So, and that's hard to do all the time. And I know it's not the best answer, and always be prepared, because one thing no one can take away from you is your education or your preparation. So that goes volumes too.
Absolutely. You mentioned that, you're taking time to read in addition to the running and all that other stuff. Keith asked, what book do you feel that every law student should read?
I would say read Devil in the Grove. That's one. I have this long list of books, but off the top of my head, I would say Devil in the Grove. It's a book about Thurgood Marshall and his work up until he was at the Supreme Court. And listen, as I would say an 8-year lawyer or something, when I first read the book, I didn't even realize what the true meaning behind Miranda warnings was. And I'm kind of embarrassed, right? History, right? And I was a prosecutor, and every day you read, it's did they read Miranda warnings, right? But there's a really rich history behind that and why it was even enacted that we don't even kind of touch upon. And Thurgood Marshall just does such great work. So I would say that would be an interesting book for people to read. It's called Devil in the Grove. It follows him and how he really shifted things in the 60s before he got on the bench. So that's a good book. That's a really good one to read.
That sounds fascinating. Yeah, I think it's interesting once you actually kind of connect the individuals behind some of these big case names or
right.
Just common terms that we kind of throw around every single day. And then you realize there's a person behind them. There's the whole process that came of this. And you really, sometimes it takes sitting down and reading through to really kind of make that connection.
Right.
There was a follow-up question to that, on the same level with books, but what book would you feel people should read to better understand the law enforcement community relationship? Do you have any suggestions for that topic?
I can't think of the name of the book, but there was a book that came out after Ferguson, and it was really talking about the Ferguson effect on law enforcement. So it was a really interesting read on the shift, right? After that, I can't think of the name right now, but it really talks about the Ferguson effect.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and if we think of it, or maybe if someone else knows it and they want to throw it in the chat too, feel free. So, awesome. Okay, so we've got, let's see, a few more questions. Give me 1 second to scroll through here. All right. One question. Someone was asking, this is an undergraduate student who wanted to stay private, but we've been talking a lot about how passion really influences how people get into their practice area. If you're not sure what you want to do when you're a lawyer, how do you test out different topics and different practice areas until you find your passion?
Okay, so I would say don't be afraid if you don't absolutely know what you want to do in undergrad or law school. And I told you guys my background, right, to how I got to where I am, right? You would have never thought that. But you just have to try different things, right? You join different clubs. Like I was in Sports and Entertainment Law Society, and I was in, I did an intern. I did in law school, the beauty of it, sometimes you can do clinics, right? I did a dependency law, a family law clinic, and I knew that wasn't for me. The minute I did that clinic, I was like, okay, family law is not my thing, right? So sometimes, or volunteering at different types of legal fields that'll really help you feel like, okay, well, what do I like? What can I dig my heels into versus this is awful, right? Because family law just wouldn't be my thing. But I would say that it's the best way to get that experience and really figure out what you want to do. And don't be upset if it doesn't work out the first time around, because you have your whole lives ahead of you. And it's not just this few-year bubble. You'll reach, especially for the undergrads, by the time you get to 30 and 40, then that's when you'll start really feeling confident about who you are. So.
It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, for sure. So I think we all have maybe had one of those moments where we find ourselves doing something that we didn't expect that we were going to be doing, or found a talent we didn't know we had, and we kind of just ran with it. So it takes time to get there. Someone asked, let's see. Oh, it was about the book you mentioned earlier. Was the book The War of Police by Jeff Rorta? Does that sound familiar?
That sounds familiar, but I can't say for sure. But if it's talking about kind of like, you know, how law enforcement and policing has changed specifically based on this whole Ferguson effect, then that's it.
Either way.
Thank you.
Okay. Even if that is not the exact, it's a good topic to look. So go find more books.
Right.
Read all of them just to be safe, you know,
Right.
Get them all. Let's see. So we're running up on just at the end of the hour here. So we have time for just maybe one or two more questions. So if anyone has any last minute ones, feel free to throw them in the chat there before we wrap up. But before we do wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time this evening. You are obviously very busy and you're doing about all these different things at once, and we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our members. For those who don't know, Lawonda was recommended by the Florida Atlantic University pre-law chapter. They had her in as a speaker, and as we often do with Phi Alpha Delta, we kind of crowdsourced a little bit, and they recommended her very highly, and so we were able to incorporate her into the Founders Week programming this week. So we are very grateful to have her, and we thank her again for her time. I know there's a lot of people out there from many walks of life, and they just want to hear about, you know, what some attorneys do on a daily basis and all of the perspectives. So we really appreciate it. Thank you. So I guess final question to wrap up is the last one that came in. I guess because we're talking about this passion thing, I guess I'm curious. This is a question just for me. Do you still do things with the music industry since that was your first passion? Are you still involved in that on a community level or just kind of a personal level?
So during the holidays, I used to participate in like a singing troupe where we would go around and we would carol, and, you know, like nobody knows who I am and nobody knows what I do, but it's just a fun thing for me because I love to sing and I love music. So I still play piano, and I still love to do that in my spare time, and sing in the church choir too.
Holding on to those first loves, making sure they don't go anywhere.
Listen, I enjoy it a little bit more now than when I had to focus on it for school, when I actually had to study, right? Specifically theory and things like that. It wasn't fun, but now it's fun. So.
Yeah, now it's fun because you do it on your own terms, and then you don't have to be there at a certain time or turn papers in. Yeah, I get that for sure. Great. Well, it looks like we have gone through all of our questions. So if anyone has any last items to say, obviously, of course, feel free to throw them in the chat. But otherwise, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We know there are plenty of things you could be choosing to do with your evening, and you decided to be here with us. And we very much appreciate you. We appreciate your membership in Phi Alpha Delta and all of the things all of our members do to make this fraternity as successful as it is. So thank you to you. Thank you to Lawonda. And everyone have a fantastic rest of your evening.
Yes, thank you all for having me. Have a good evening.